Hi, everyone. This is Jennifer from Amity Law Group. I'm here with my partners, Cindy and Edmund. Today, we would like to talk to you about the transfer on death deed. I know we've talked about this topic in the past, but we're really going to focus today on the fact that this law that California has passed is set to expire on January 1st of 2021, which is in less than a year. So this law currently allows individuals who own property to add a beneficiary on their deed. And so in essence, if you pass away, then this property would be transferred to the individual or individuals that you've added onto the transfer on death deed. But right now, the problem is that this law is set to expire again on January 1st, 2021. So what is it that we need to know about it? Are the previous transfer on death deeds that were recorded going to be continue to be effective? So maybe Edmund, you can kind of point them along what issues people need to be aware of.
Jennifer, those are really good questions. So a lot of people have been asking us, if the law expires, will my transfer on death deed still work? So right now, the law is set to expire on January 1st, 2021, so next year. And so what that means is if the legislator, if the lawmakers do not extend the law, then anyone who records a transfer on death deed, it's not going to work. And I'm pretty sure the county recorder's office are not going to accept any after the expiration date if it doesn't get extended. But the good news is, if you have recorded a transfer on death deed before January 1st, 2021, then based on what we know now, it looks like the transfer on death deed still works. So let's say something happens to you, you pass away 5 years later, you execute the transfer on death deed now, then it's going to work. But Cindy's going to go through later some of the problems with transfer on death deeds. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to answer the question, should I use a transfer on death deed to transfer my house to my children if I pass? So rather than doing a will or a living trust, a lot of people have been executing these transfer on death deeds. And one of the reasons why people are doing it is because first, you can change the beneficiary at any time during your lifetime. So let's say you wanted to give your house to your son now, you can change your mind and give it to your daughter later. But the question is, if the bill expires on January 1st, 2021, and you want to make the change later, how do you do it? We don't know. There's so much uncertainty about transfer on death deeds. And that's why we always recommend people against it. Because a lot of people, they would do a transfer on death deed because it's less expensive than a living trust. But based on what we see, it's more expensive than a living trust because of the problems that it creates. One of the biggest problems is if you do it wrong, it doesn't avoid probate. And the average cost of probate right now in California is over $34,000 for homeowners. So that's the balancing act, right? Do you pay for a living trust, which costs a fraction of probate court, or do you take the risk of putting your house at risk of being in probate and do it yourself with a transfer on death deed? So those are some things that you need to weigh with your spouse and your family to see whether or not a transfer on death deed is something that's appropriate for yourself, for your children, and for your spouse. Another thing about transfer on death deeds is that the person that you leave your house to, they don't have legal interest in your house until you pass away. So let's say your son gets sued, his creditors will not be able to reach your house until the deed becomes effective, which is upon your death. And so that's why some people like to do that. But you can also make that a reality when you set up a living trust. And the third reason why people set up a transfer on death deed, like I mentioned, probate. You want to make sure that you avoid probate at all costs because it's very expensive. It takes usually over a year now in Los Angeles because of the backlog and because of the coronavirus, because of the court shutdowns, the probate process is probably going to be even longer in the next few years. So you want to do it right. Your house is your most valuable asset, and for a lot of people, and you want to make sure that it gets transferred to your kids in the best way possible. So Cindy, what are some of the disadvantages, because there's so many, I just listed a couple, like what are some of the disadvantages of a transfer on death deed?
So the first issue that you'll have with a transfer on death deed is properties that are held in joint tenancy. So it doesn't really work quite well for properties held in joint, or not as well for properties that are held by two people jointly. When you hold properties jointly, you're saying that if one of you pass, the survivor of you will receive the asset, will receive the property. But if you record a transfer, if one of you decides to record a transfer on death deed, then you may not be the last person to pass. So if you are the first to pass and you've recorded a transfer on death deed, it's not going to be effective because the joint tenancy trumps the transfer on death deed. So that joint tenant, the survivor of the two of you, is going to receive your share of that asset, and not the person that you listed on the transfer on death deed. So it does get tricky there for properties that are held jointly with two or more people. Also, another thing is that it doesn't protect you if you become incapacitated. So if you lose the capacity to execute or notarize a document, then you cannot sell your property. And that may be a time where you really need to liquidate. If you're in a group home or a senior home or something like that, those things can get very expensive, especially in California. And if you can't liquidate, that's, it's going to be a terrible situation. Some of the solutions there would be to get a custodian for you, a guardian, a custodian to get authority over, and that is a very long process as well. Conservatorship is very expensive and tedious process. So it becomes a mess. That's something that we discuss and can address in a trust. That works really well for a trust. Another issue is that if your beneficiary is a minor, that minor cannot hold property until they reach majority age. So if you name a person in your TOD, a minor, to receive the asset, then they're stuck. They're not going to be able to take it. They're not going to be able to benefit from it. Again, they're going to have to get a guardianship appointed in order to benefit from that asset. And guardianship petitions take a long time. It's a tedious process, and it costs money. It costs a lot of money. Another issue is that title companies have been very reluctant to ensure clear title until 3 years after the grantor's death, when a transfer on death deed is used. During this time, the beneficiary will likely be unable to sell or borrow against the property. So you basically have frozen that asset for at least 3 years, which again is probably not the intention when you created that transfer on death deed. And one of the bigger issues I always tell clients is that a transfer on death deed only addresses that property that you're recording. It does not address any of the other properties or assets that you may have. So we're talking bank accounts, any expensive heirlooms, retirement accounts, anything like that, because it doesn't touch upon any of those other accounts. It's just addressing that property. And there's always accounts that people leave with money in it, and that could definitely help your heirs. So those assets that are not a part of the TOD, they end up in probate. And then also a very important issue is that the house may be subject to Medi-Cal recovery. So if it falls into probate, it will again be subject to Medi-Cal, which is the last thing you want to happen. So a lot of disadvantages for transfer on death deed. You know, it works for very few select people. But if you want to know whether or not it works for you, contact us and we can go over that.
Yeah, thank you, Cindy. I mean, as you know, it does sound like, you know, TOD does have a lot of disadvantages and issues that we need to really be aware of. And it certainly can work for some individuals, but, you know, it's important to find out what the risks are. And, you know, you can feel free to contact us. We provide free consultation here at Amity Law Group, and we'd be happy to discuss your situation and whether a TOD deed is indeed, you know, suitable for your situation. So thank you again for tuning in. If you have any questions, feel free to contact us, and we'll see you again soon.